I always got more publicity than other people, and it wasn't like I was trying. In fact, I don't know exactly why. Maybe you can tell me why.
Oh, I could definitely tell you. You said a lot of wild
Maybe. Maybe
You said a lot of wild and then CNN, in all their brilliance, by highlighting your wild made you much more popular.
Yeah.
Well, Donald Trump did the damn thing. He went on Rogan's podcast for a friendly 3-hour conversation with Rogan on the Joe Rogan Experience. And look, Trump was his usual self. And I think in the grand scheme of things, this 3-hour conversation worked to Trump's advantage. I feel that it normalized him, humanized him, made him seem like a normal guy that will resonate with at least a huge portion of Rogan's audience. I also found it to be kind of dull, to be honest with you. It was a little boring, a little rambling. There was a fun part where they were talking about hot pilots. That, I perked up a little bit for that part of the conversation.
No, you gotta see this guy. He's out of Central Cast. He's so attractive. The pilot was so attractive, even better than Tom Cruise.
I was like, hot pilots? Where? Like, what are they talking about?
And then a cop comes in. It turns out he's not even a cop. Starts stripping. It was amazing. Okay, he didn't say that last part. All right, so the part we just showed you, that was this best part. You're welcome. Because that was the only part where Joe Rogan held him accountable. Okay, because he has some wild crap. And he said it to his face. That's good. I like that. And Trump, actually, that was one of his better moments. Because when he goes, yeah, maybe. See, that's good. That's self-effacing.
Yeah.
That people can relate to that more instead of being defensive about it and whining, crying, etc. So that was actually the very best part of the interview. The rest of it, I agree with Anna. It actually made Trump look really good. But the huge problem was it was bereft, what a fun word, of all facts at all. Like, so if you watch that interview, you got a completely misleading view of who Donald Trump is.
I wouldn't say it was bereft of all facts. There were certainly a lot of untruths, okay? There were a lot of misleading statements by Trump, but he also said a few things that sounded insane to me. And I was like, that's not true, I gotta look this up. So he made a point, for instance, about how a huge amount of California's rainwater just gets flushed into the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah.
And the reason why we do that is to conserve a very specific tiny little fish. I'm like, that's not true. That's not true. That's not the reason. Like, I knew that the majority of our rainwater was being flushed into the Pacific Ocean. I didn't realize that was the reason. That's literally the reason. I looked it up. So he says things that sound crazy that actually have truth behind them. But then he says things that sound like, oh, that sounds like that might make sense. And then you fact check that and it's like, no, that was complete and utter BS.
Yeah, there was a couple of parts, like of course he's not gonna lie about 100% of the things. And you're right, sometimes like the raking of the forest we've talked about before.
Yeah.
But that's partly because he doesn't know how to speak, right?
So when he talks about something that I actually think is a good point, like the Native Americans did controlled burns. They did forest management due to wildfires. We don't do that, and there's a price to pay for not doing that. But rather than talk about controlled burns or fire management, he instead talks about raking the forests. So like, if you understand what he's really talking about and what he means, you'll give him a pass. But a lot of people don't know what he's talking about. So the idea that you're gonna rake the forest and that's the way you do forest management.
Well, see, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump have the exact opposite problem, right? Kamala Harris is a talking point machine. You can't move her off the talking points. And Trump is so far off the talking points that it just doesn't even make sense. He's like, what, you didn't know raking the forest meant controlled burns? Yeah, no, nobody knew that because those two things are not the same words and they're not the same phrases and not the same concepts.
In Norway, they rake the forest.
The problem with California, they're not raking the forest. Okay, no, that's not exactly it. But anyways, but those are relatively benign. And by the way, if you want to have a debate about the fish, no problem, got you. But at least he's corrected that is why we drain the water out into the Pacific.
Listen, I love those little fish, and I hear you, environmentalists who want to protect the fish. I'd like to protect humanity, and I don't want to have a conversation about literally rationing water when like 80% of our rainwater is being flushed into the Pacific Ocean, specifically to save one fish. There's got to be another way.
I hear you. That's a debate for another time. I agree with you, but others would debate us because 2-inch fish are more important than humans. But anyway, I'm being a jerk about it. We could have a fun conversation about that another day, but much more important stuff.
Okay, so there was a portion of the conversation that really caught my attention, mostly because of how brazen Trump was in sharing details about this. So it had to do with an interaction, a transactional relationship he had with a member of Congress years before he even ran for president. I will just preface this by saying I posted about it on social media and no one cared and everyone tried to justify it. But with that in mind, let's take a look.
So there was a congressman years before I ran, and I was very close to him. And I needed a license on something, and he was very important in getting the license. But it was a little bit controversial, the license, this particular thing that was being licensed. But I was close to this guy and helped him and everything else. And I went to him, I said, I'd like to have your help. And he said, let me take a look at it. I said, ooh, that's not too good. But I really hope you're going to help. And anyway, he tapped me along for a long period of time and ultimately didn't do it. And I said, you are a stiff. You could have done this thing so easy, et cetera. But it was controversial. He was in Congress for many years, like 28 years. And you know, there's a reason when somebody's there for 28 years, you got to be sort of smart.
Right.
You know, you have
A
all the
survivor.
scandals. And I realized he was a survivor.
Okay, all right.
Okay,
Let's
love
get
that
the
story.
irrelevant points out of the way. You are a stiff. Like there's that, and then and then I realized he was a survivor. Like I did not see that coming. I thought he was gonna berate the guy more. But to his credit, he didn't. He tried to make a point about how the guy seemed to be a little more careful because he wanted to survive in Congress. He didn't want to be dealing with scandal. But the point remains that Trump approached a member of Congress who he had a close relationship with, who he had done favors for, and was expecting a favor in return. And that favor was a questionable, controversial license.
Yeah, look, if you're MAGA, you could say, he didn't say that he asked for something illegal, you guys are being unfair. You could make 100 excuses.
Just a little controversial.
Right. But if you're a normal person, you know what he was talking about, right? When Trump says, we were dealing with a licensing issue, and it was a little controversial, and this guy was a stiff. He wouldn't just do the thing that I asked him.
But he was a survivor.
And I'd already helped him out. That's super obvious what he's talking about. He'd give him a campaign donation, I presume, and that's a kind way of looking at it. I don't know if he gave him anything else. And then he was expecting for an illegal favor back, and the guy wouldn't do it. And you could tell that it was not the right thing to do because Trump then said he was smart not to do it. He was a survivor not to do it.
Right.
Because if he had done it, he might not have survived. Why might he not survive? Because it was illegal. Okay, so we don't have him because he didn't say illegal and Rogan didn't follow up.
Right.
But this is exactly what's wrong with Trump. He's a mobster.
But
So he's done this his whole life. And I know what MAGA will say. Oh, in real estate, you gotta be a mobster. This is how you get things done in real estate. But do we really want to elect a mobster for president?
okay, that is a fair point, Cenk. It's definitely a fair point, and in fact, so fair that that portion of the interview caught my attention, and that's why I clipped it out. But I'll also say that it would be a mistake to assume that Trump is novel in this practice. This is a practice that I think is pretty widespread in our government, both on a local level and a federal level. So I'll give you an example. I mean, on a local level, we literally have members of the LA City Council who have now been convicted and given prison sentences for all sorts of quid pro quo types of schemes with real estate developers, right? And so this kind of like greasing and like nefarious behind the scenes deal making, it happens, it's widespread, and sometimes there's consequences for it. Sometimes it goes on without any consequences.
So I'll tell you the difference between Trump and other politicians. Both, you're absolutely right. Establishment Democrats and establishment Republicans do this all the time, but they do it in a little bit smarter way, so that sometimes they get caught anyway. Sometimes they also break the rules and they get greedy, et cetera. But the smart way that they do it is, for example, in California, real estate interests will give money to politicians. I'm not saying who. I'm not saying who's in charge. And really though, it's real estate guys own local politics in almost all the states. They're usually in the top 2 donors, along with utilities, okay, at the local level. So what they do, they'll give money and they'll say, oh, we're fighting homelessness. Now I got some junk properties I can't get rid of. And then I'll get them, the state, to buy my property so they could fight homelessness with it and put homeless people in it. And I'll charge them 3 times what I can get in the market.
That's exactly
right.
right.
And since it's a government bureaucrat that I gave a campaign contribution to his boss, I'm gonna get 3 times the value of my property, and they're not even gonna put any homeless people in that property.
No, that's exactly right. And then it's oh God, it's gets even worse than that, right? Because those real estate interests get to sell the property, the distressed property, to the state or the city. And then what the city does is they'll contract out some nonprofit to renovate the building in order to make it ready for low-income housing or for the homeless population. But they'll take the money and run. They never finish the projects. I did a long story about that on the show recently. So really good point, Cenk.
Yeah, now, but the difference with Trump is that he's a blunt instrument.
He is.
So like, I keep going back to this story because it's so funny and illustrative. A former executive of Trump organization said that Trump told her not to put the Braille in the elevators, which was New York law. And she's like, we can't, it's the law. You have to put the Braille numbers in the elevator. He's like, so what? I don't like it. It's not classy. Don't do it. Now, hey, knucklehead.
Oh God.
The regulators are gonna catch that on day one, and they're gonna know what you did was illegal, and they're gonna make you redo it. He doesn't care about the laws. So he doesn't hesitate for a second in breaking a law or asking for something illegal. He doesn't bother trying to come up with a sophisticated scheme like the others do to rob you of your money.
So there was an amusing moment. There were many amusing moments, to be fair, even though overall it was mostly a dull conversation. But one of the moments that I was amused by was when he was talking about choosing outsiders or appointing outsiders to serve as in his administration, and he forgot for a second that he himself is considered an outsider. That's actually something that his voters love about him. But nonetheless, let's hear Donald Trump's thoughts on the threat that outsiders pose.
I had to rely on people that I respected or liked, but that I didn't know that well because I didn't know them that well. Some of those people I campaigned against because, when you have 18 people, we had mostly politicians running in the election, running in the primaries, and they got knocked out one by one, but I got to like some of them. Some of them I didn't like at all, and I don't like them now. And I'd rely on them and I'd rely on other people. But it's very dangerous to pick somebody outside of a politician because a politician's been basically vetted for years.
Right.
You pick a business guy and they've never been vetted at all, and they're the head of a big company or something, but they've never been vetted. You know nothing about his personal life. You know nothing about where he's been. When you put him in, it's a little bit dangerous because all of a sudden they get checked up and you hear things that you're saying, wow, this is not going to work out too well. So it's very dangerous. Picking people that are outside of politics is somewhat dangerous.
Oops.
Is it?
I mean, I agree, it turns out. No, seriously, look, he's not getting that.
That he's an outsider.
That he's a guy outside of politics, and he's saying it's very dangerous to pick someone like me because we don't know what we're doing. Okay, now the funny thing is I disagree with him.
Same.
Yeah, I actually don't want any politicians. I think politicians are all talking point machines except Trump, but Trump's got the opposite problem, right? I just want someone sensible like a Jon Stewart or a Sean Fain or a Sean O'Brien, some union leader or a comic, anyone who actually cares about us and hasn't already been corrupted by the system. I don't think they're dangerous at all. I think Trump's dangerous, not the rest of them.
Yeah, someone who's DC brained is far less likely to represent the best interests of the American people as opposed to an outsider who might be a little more disruptive to the establishment. So I agree with you. Okay, I want to go to the last video, and this one we're going to get into the substance here because I think Trump has been able to kind of get away with murder in regard to how he's branded himself with the accomplishments that he has made with the economy. So let's hear this portion of the conversation. I'll tell you what I'm talking about.
One of the criticisms of your administration was with tax cuts and with tariffs, you increased the deficit. So what was the strategy behind that? And did you think it was going to increase the deficit by a substantial amount?
Okay, we were ready to rock. It was all, I had a bad system. We had horrible tax policy. I made it great with a much lower tax rate. So I took it from almost 40% down to 21%. Now I'm bringing it from 21 down to 15, but only if you make your product in the United States, which is great. People call me this, said, what a great idea. Nobody ever heard of that before. 21, in the first year, we took in much more revenue than we did at almost 40. Think of that.
So how does the deficit increase because of that?
So what happened is this. We were ready to rock and roll, and then we had the COVID thing, and we had to focus on that. And if we didn't give some businesses a hand, they would have you would have had a depression like in 1929.
So essentially what Trump is saying here is, no, I was like on a great track. The debt was perfectly fine under my watch. It was just that things got screwed up due to COVID. So if you look at an analysis of, well, you could even look at an analysis of Trump versus Biden as it applies to the national debt. In fact, why don't we take a look at this chart? So what you're looking at is a chart that was done by the committee or it's using data from the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Axios put the chart together and it shows you the difference between Donald Trump and Joe Biden when it comes to increasing the federal debt. And as you can see, as of June 21st of this year, Biden had contributed $4.3 trillion to the federal debt in total, and that includes $2.1 trillion in COVID relief. But when it comes to Trump, he had already increased the federal debt to the tune of $4.8 trillion before COVID, and then dug another $3.6 trillion hole due to COVID relief, okay? So why is that? Well, there are multiple reasons, but one of the biggest reasons was the massive tax cut bill that he managed to pass in 2017. That added $2 trillion to our debt as a result of lower tax revenue from corporations and some of the wealthiest individuals in this country. That's why you had a situation in which some corporations that were tremendously lucrative and successful, like Amazon, had a few years or a year at least where they didn't even have to pay a single dollar in federal taxes. And so according to Axios, for Trump, the biggest non-COVID drivers of higher public debt were his signature tax cuts enacted in 2017, causing $1.9 trillion in additional borrowing, and bipartisan spending packages, which added $2.1 trillion. What's interesting though is what Biden spent the money on versus what Trump spent the money on. Trump spent the money on getting tax cuts for the rich and corporations, whereas with Biden, major non-COVID factors include the 2022 and 2023 spending bills, $1.4 trillion, student debt relief, $620 billion, and legislation to support healthcare for veterans to the tune of $520 billion. So you might not agree with that spending anyway, but I do think that the priorities here are very different and should be noted.
Yeah, so look, I don't think that there's been any malice on Joe Rogan's part, but he leans right wing. He's not completely right wing. And remember, he did endorse Bernie Sanders back in 2016. So he's more of a populist, but he's not equipped for a deep political conversation. And so on the one hand, I'm not on the extreme left that says, don't platform Trump if you can't fact check him on every single thing, don't even have the conversation. No, there's time for fact checks, there's time for podcasts, etc. But I wish he was better equipped, because when Trump says, it was just COVID, we were ready to rock. We were ready to rock, and then COVID hit. Yeah, no, we just showed you the numbers. I wish Rogan could have said at that point, but brother, you already had $4.8 trillion in debt piled up, and half of that was because of your corporate tax cuts. You didn't make that money back. You didn't, it's gone, and now at some point, the average guy's gonna have to make that up. But when you didn't hear that and you didn't see those numbers that Anna shared with you guys, people left that interview because nobody's like, most people have regular jobs. They don't know all the details of politics and all the stats and numbers. They walk away thinking, oh, poor Trump, he was ready to rock, but because of COVID, that's the only reason why we had debt under Trump. And it's not remotely true. And it's super important for you to know that, because he's gonna do another corporate tax cut, and that's gonna cost us trillions more. And then he's gonna say, oh, we were ready to rock, but then, well, we had rain on Wednesday, and that's why. No, it's your giant giveaways to the rich.
Yeah, and look, to be fair, Trump's plan, which might not work, right, is, okay, well, I'm gonna lower the corporate tax rate from 21% to 15%, but only for corporations that manufacture their products here in the United States. And the idea is, slap massive tariffs on companies that are importing products to the United States as they're taking advantage of cheap labor abroad, and those tariffs will help fund the government in lieu of the tax income that would come from the corporations. That is the thinking that Trump has when it comes to his economic policies.
Yeah, theoretically, but I don't believe him at all. Let me tell you exactly why. It's not just general, right? Number one, that provision about, it has to be people manufacturing here didn't exist before. He unveiled this like a year ago, and that was not in the proposal at all. He added that in later to make it more popular, but when he realized it's not a very populist position to say, I'm gonna give away a couple more $1 trillion to my corporate donor friends. So he's like, I meant because I'm protecting America and American manufacturing. That's, that's the ticket. So why didn't you say it a year ago? That's point one. The point two is, when he was doing that giant corporate giveaway, last time he said, but I'm gonna close all the loopholes. The loopholes, they're gone. I'm closing them, so we'll make even more money. You know how many loopholes he closed? None, zero. He never meant it. He was never gonna close any loopholes because his donors make tremendous amount of money from those loopholes. So you think he's gonna just do it for the manufacturing set? No, he's gonna do a giant tax cut with no brakes in the car at all. His donors paid for it, and he's gonna give them exactly what they wanted. So we're honest, and we tell you the establishment politicians on both sides do these giant giveaways to their donors, but so does Donald Trump. Just because he talks like an average person or way below average person doesn't mean that he's not a crook just like the rest of them. It's in the policies. It's in what he actually already did. Like Republicans always say, look at the 4 years before. Look at the 4 years. Yeah, well, I did look at it, and he created, okay, let me give you context. Before Trump got in office, we already had a giant $20 trillion deficit. But he added 8.4 on top of the 20. That means he increased it by about 40% in just 4 years. Remember, he's the king debt. King of debt, right? And so that's what he did in all of his businesses. That's why all of his businesses went bankrupt. He's gonna bankrupt the country. He's loading us up with so much debt because part of the answer is, the economy's good when I give tax cuts and when I spend a lot. So I want it to be good under me. Later it blows up on you and your kids. What do I care anyway?
Well, that's why he's bringing Elon Musk in to cut costs, Cenk.
It's gonna be a massive, gigantic robbery if Trump wins.
We're getting robbed right now.
I mean, yeah, right now. Look, we have the normal robbery in process as we speak, where both parties rob us to give to their donors. But Trump and Elon are a blunt instrument, and they're looking to speed that process up. They're gonna take so much money off of us, let alone the Bitcoin scams that Elon's gonna do under Trump. It's gonna be a disaster. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR, so those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.